Joining us, former Energy Minister Kevin Ramnarine. A pleasant good evening to you, sir.
Hi, good evening, good evening.
Always a pleasure to have you on.
Thank you, good too.
Mid-year review. We've been looking at this. Last week we had some folks on, and we're not here to spread doom and gloom, but the takeaway from it had nothing to do with generating as far as revenue, foreign investment. As a matter of fact, a lot of the information surrounding it was a bit manipulative in the sense that credit agencies perhaps did not get access. We've been told about the IMF report, which was based on cherry picking. Where are we at looking at this? Mr. Imber, the finance minister, says the projected revenue that this country could receive this year may be 51 billion, which is 3 billion less than the figure that was projected in the 2023-2024 budget in Parliament last October. What are we looking at?
Well, a few days before the mid-year review was brought to the Parliament, the minister himself swore an affidavit. And of course, when you swear affidavit, you take an oath and you can't lie to the court. So the presumption is what is in the affidavit is the truth. And I read the affidavit, and I found the affidavit to be very reflective of a lot of the positions I have taken, and other persons who are described as naysayers have taken with regard to the economy. The minister in the affidavit laments the decline in government revenue on account of things like falling natural gas production. He says natural gas prices have fallen by 36%, and as a result, there is a shortfall, a significant shortfall in the revenue for fiscal 2024, right? So in the mid-year review, which was recently concluded with a debate in the Senate, the minister came to the Parliament saying that we were collecting less revenue than we anticipated. In fact, in the budget we expected to collect $54 billion, and he comes now in the mid-year review in June 2024, saying that we are only going to collect 51, and even that I think is optimistic. And in addition to him saying that we're collecting less revenue, he said, but we're going to be spending more money. So that is as though a man comes home to his family and he says that I have gotten a cut in my salary, but we're going to increase how much money we're spending on groceries. That is the analogy I would use. So the mid-year review, so in the budget, the minister said we would collect 54 billion and our expenditure would be 59 billion. And our deficit was therefore 5 billion, right? He comes in the mid-year review and he says revenue is now going to be lower, 51 billion, and expenditure is going to be 60 billion. Our deficit is now 9 billion. I want to believe that when we get to the month of October and the minister has to report for the entire fiscal year, that deficit is going to be more in the region of $10+ billion, right?
Right.
So how is the minister expecting to run this country where there is such a big difference between revenue and expenditure? And that difference between revenue and expenditure is predicated on falling natural gas production.
Right.
At a 20-year low, natural gas production is at a 20-year low, and natural gas prices, are 36% lower than what was budgeted. So we budgeted, I believe it was $5 per MMBTU, per million British thermal unit, and we're getting something like $3.26 or something like that, right?
Right.
So there's a significant shortfall. And so the minister did not make it a secret in his contribution in either the House of Representatives or in the House of Representatives. He said that the government intended to go to the international market to issue a bond. Now, if you walk around Trinidad and Tobago, Mikey, and you ask people, what does that mean that I'm going to issue a bond? Well, the layperson may not know what that means. What that means is that I'm going to borrow money. But when you issue a bond, it is akin to taking a loan, right? And the only difference between a bond and a loan is the source of capital. When you borrow money from a bank as a loan, the source of the capital is the bank. In a bond, the source of the capital is various investors who invest in the bond, to put their money in the bond. So today, we learned that the minister didn't waste any time, and that he went to the international market to borrow $750 million US, and that press release only came out, I think, within the last hour and a half. I saw it on the TTT online Facebook. So the country has borrowed, and it's not the minister borrowing. This is the country borrowing. And what a friend of mine, pointed out to me is not the government or the minister who will have to repay this bond. It is as though he's borrowing this money from the people of Trinidad and Tobago because we have to repay it. Right? Yeah. So here is the press release. The press release is dated June the 18th, 2024, and it says Ministry of Finance successfully raises $750 million US on the international capital market. The Minister of Finance is pleased to announce that following a 9-hour-long virtual roadshow yesterday, where the minister made presentations on several occasions throughout the day to international investors on the Republic of Trinidad and Tobago, that he goes on to say that the roadshow went well, and the minister was successfully able to answer the questions of investors, and that it was oversubscribed by 280% and so on. So what all that means is that the country has gone deeper into debt to the tune of $750 million US. Now the question is, why is the minister borrowing $750 million US? If we have a problem with our revenue, Mikey, our revenue, the government of Trinidad and Tobago, when it spends on goods and services, when it pays public servant salaries, when it pays old age pension, when it pays contractors to pave a road, it makes all those commitments in Trinidad and Tobago dollars. So why is the minister borrowing US dollars? Why did the minister not float a bond locally in Trinidad and Tobago and raise the equivalent in Trinidad and Tobago dollars? Why did he not go to Republic Bank and FCB and to Scotiabank and tell them, get together and we'll borrow this money from you? He went to the international market, in my opinion, because part of this strategy is to shore up the foreign reserves of the country. When the government receives this $750 million from this bond issue, right? And I'll talk a bit more about the interest rate which the government of Trinidad and Tobago offered, which is 6.4%, which is about 0.5% higher than the previous international bond, which was about 5.95%. So it means that we are paying more for money, right? We are paying money is becoming more expensive for Trinidad and Tobago to borrow. And the reason for that is that our credit rating over the weekend went from a positive outlook to a stable outlook.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And that seems to have been lost in the noise over the weekend, over the by-elections and over the internal election in the UNC. But Moody's revised our credit rating from BA2 positive to BA2 stable. Now the next outlook below stable is negative. So money is becoming more expensive to the government of Trinidad and Tobago to borrow. And this $750 million US will take our external debt to $6 billion US. At the same time, our foreign reserves are about $6.2 billion US when you add this $750 million. So we have $6.2 billion in the gas bank, right, and we owe people $6 billion US.
Yeah, but Mr. Ramnarine,
we're almost at zero.
Well, that's the thing. That's the thing about it. I mean, and what you're clearing up for us here is basically, listen, at this point in time, the government has said, according to Mr. Inwood, he said that there have been fluctuations in the prices of oil and natural gas. Remember, it started off last October with US $85 per barrel it was pegged, and of course gas at US $5 per MMBTU. And of course you just cleared it up what those prices are now. He said that when one looks at the adjustments that we have to make, we are now projecting a lower figure for the revenue because we have to be pragmatic. So why was this not before? Why wasn't he pragmatic before? Was the budget, of course, just an election budget? I mean, because we know quite well that the money is not going to be there. How they expect to govern with something that is not there?
So,
That is the part we are.
We have entered the election season, right? And I think that once 2024 dawned, once the first sun rose on the year 2024, we entered the election season, but it became even more feverish over the weekend with the internal election in the UNC, and I must say that internal election has mobilized the UNC because the party looks fully energized, right? And congratulations to the Star Slate on winning a pretty comprehensive victory. And then there were the two by-elections yesterday. So the bell has rung, and we are in election season. And the government knows that there are two big issues on which they have to defend their track record. One is their record on crime, and they don't have much of a defense there. And the other is their record on the economy, and they will try to, of course, come with a lot of political spin to explain how they've managed the economy. But let's look at when you look at some of these figures, right? The economy has declined. The economy has contracted by 18.8% in the last 10 years, 9 of which have been under this Minister of Finance. The GDP of the country was at its highest ever in 2014 at 189 billion Trinidad Tobago dollars. It is now 153.5 billion Trinidad Tobago dollars. Our foreign reserves and the issue of the U.S. access and supply of U.S. dollars, I will not come off that issue for the next 6 months because it is the most important economic issue facing the country. The peak foreign reserves of this country were realized in December 2014 at 11.4 billion US dollars, highest ever. It is now at the end of May 2024, 5.4 billion US dollars, or a decline of 53%. And it is falling. It is good. So Mikey, if I ask you, forget that we are on a talk show and I meet you on the side of the road and I say, do you think, Mikey, that in 12 months from now, you will be able to accept your ability to get US dollars from the bank will be harder or easier?
Well,
it will be harder.
Harder. But the thing about it, Mr. Ramnarine, listen a second. But you have a prime minister that travels. He deemed himself to be the best salesman around. And when you talk about going to other countries, the importance of foreign exchange, the foreign currency, is to access global markets and to expand our trade relationships with other countries. And if he's visiting other countries and opening other markets, why then is it such a challenge for us to get this foreign currency?
So what has happened, Mikey? Let's explain the ins and outs of the foreign exchange market very quickly. Trinidad and Tobago earns foreign exchange when oil and gas companies pay taxes and royalties in the main.
Right.
That's one avenue which we get. So those US dollars are the property of the government. And the government puts them, but the government doesn't operate the Trinidad and Tobago, its operations. The operations of government is not conducted in US dollars, it's conducted in TT dollars. So what the government does is take those US dollars and they put it into the central bank, and the central bank gives the government Trinidad and Tobago dollars in return. So that's how we build our foreign reserves. And the second way US dollars get into this economy is when people, or the public as the central bank likes to call them, convert US dollars. So if I have 200 US dollars in a shoebox. I carry it to the bank, and the bank gives me the equivalent in TT. I convert. But the banks get something like about, I think it's about $4 to $5 billion US a year from conversions. That is not coming from you and I, clearly, right? That could never be Mikee K and Kevin Ramnarine. That is coming in main from the oil and gas companies again, and the point leases companies selling US dollars this time to the commercial banks to fund their operations in country. So about 70% of the US dollars the banks purchase from the public, right, comes from the energy sector. And the other avenue by which the banks get US dollars is when the central bank sells them. Those two streams that I just described, one, the central bank stream, and two, the public converting US dollars and buying TT dollars, those two streams have been reduced. I don't want to be dramatic and say they've dried up. They have been significantly reduced over the period of the last 10 years because of the decline in the health of the oil and gas industry.
All right.
So when you produce less gas, you earn less US dollars. When you produce less oil, you earn less US dollars.
All right. I know you have another interview, so I want to bring it right back.
Before we jump off, I don't know how, do we have 5 minutes again?
Yeah, but I want to touch on something as well. The fact of the matter here is, if we're not generating revenue, then it brings us right back to the fact of taxing our citizens to death, because the opposition leader has brought proof of a cabinet note to substantiate her claim that the government considered an increase in value-added tax to raise revenue.
Well, interestingly, the leader of the opposition has consistently been saying that the country is broke. And when she says things like that, normally the government, especially the Minister of Finance, would challenge it and, say something negative and so on. But I noticed that it didn't challenge it this time. And then the media review came and she was proven correct, right? Because a $9 to $10 billion deficit, it means if you have a household and your monthly expenditure in your household is 20,000 Trinidad and Tobago dollars, right? And your salary is $12,000. Isn't that broke? You're not broke. You're broke.
Yeah.
Right. So your alternative to survive, right, is either you reduce your expenditure, you change your standard of living, or you go and you borrow some money from the money lender, or you use your credit card, or you go to the bank and so on. And now the government has made it clear that they intend to borrow their way. And there's BORROW, as in to borrow from a bank. And there's BURROW, which is like a borrow into a hole, right? So I don't know which one it is. It might be BURR, it might be they're going into a hole. But interestingly, in the affidavit that the minister swore in the matter of Dure versus the Attorney General, which is the matter of the PSA and the TTRA, the minister lamented in that affidavit, which was on the 3rd of June 2024, that foreign borrowing, that an increase in external borrowings by the government to finance this expenditure results in an increase in expenditure of foreign currency. Because if I borrow US dollars on the international market, I have to pay it back in US dollars. I don't think they want it back in TT dollars. They want it back in US dollars. And they also want it back in interest. And he went on to say this has a negative impact on the country's foreign exchange reserve balances and import cover. That was the 3rd of June 2024. In the space of 4 days, the minister comes into the parliament and he says, we have been very successful in all our international bond issues. In fact, we are going to another international bond shortly, which is the one that happened today, because in order to maintain credibility in the world, you must continue to present yourself to the larger international banks and the major investors around the world. So what he is doing on these are two very different positions that were taken within the space of 4 days.
Yeah.
So my concern is that the government is almost like a last wicket pair in a test match. You know, the last two fellas who batted. And they are facing some serious, the wicket is beginning to turn and they're facing some serious spin bowling. And they're trying to bat out the day. And they're doing that by, of course, now they've gone to the remedy of borrowing money. And that, when you borrow, Mikey, of course, common sense, all the listeners would know, when you borrow, you have to repay.
Of course.
And it's either you repay or you refinance, right? In the case of the Petrotrin $850 million bullet payment, which was due in 2019, that was refinanced. So here it is now that we are going into more debt. And the debt level of the country is going to continue to rise because that revenue, our earnings, will be constrained for a very long time. So the question is, what do we do? So people might say, well, Mr. Ramnarine, or well, Mikey, what will all you fellas do? If you are in the driver's seat at some point in time where you have a role in policy, what would you do? Well, it is, we have to earn, the bottom line is we have to earn more money. We have to figure out how we're going to arrange our economic affairs so that we earn more money. And there's the fastest way to do that, the fastest way that I know to do that, and I challenge anybody to find a faster way, is to increase oil and gas production.
Of course. That makes sense.
That is not going to happen in 1 year. It's not going to happen in 2 years. It may take 3, possibly 3.5 to 4 years to happen. But with the correct policies and incentives, fiscal incentives and so on, it could happen. And that's why you're doing that now. You have to find other revenue generation strategies in the non-energy sector. And all your efforts should be targeted to in earning US dollars for Trinidad and Tobago. So if we are developing the non-energy sector, the agriculture, the manufacturing, tourism, it should be with the view of earning US dollars for the country.
Yeah, but government doesn't have time as it is. They're simply biding time.
I want to say one more thing because I know that your video is circulated and so on widely.
Yeah.
I want to say one more thing that our foreign reserves are now at 5.4 billion, and inside of that 5.4 billion, about 60% of it is monies US dollars which were borrowed and put into that foreign reserves, and something called special drawing rights, SDRs from the IMF. A very senior economist told me that as the reserves get lower and lower and lower, the rate of decline will accelerate. And the reason for that is a sort of scarcity mentality. When people, it's like when you hear there's a shortage of gas in the gas stations in Trinidad, what is that, Mikey?
There's a run. People just run.
There's a run on the gas stations, right?
Yeah.
So when psychologically people begin to sense that the US dollars in Trinidad is going from bad, which is where it is now, to worse, you will get people increasing the level of hoarding. You will get people trying to grab as much, trying to get as much as they can get. You may get, so what we have observed and what Moody's observed in their latest report on Trinidad, which came out last week, I think Friday or Saturday, is that there's been an acceleration in that rate of decline of the foreign reserves. So we went from 6.4 billion US to 5.4 billion very fast, so within the space of 5 or 6 months, right? Yeah. So this US dollar problem is very, very much a concern, and the question would be, is a devaluation inevitable, or can we avoid a devaluation?
And I want to look at that. We gotta stick a pin in it now. But We got to stick a pin in it because I know you got to go, and I've got another interview.
We'll talk a bit about what are some of the remedies, but
Right.
a devaluation is not something which is a pleasant thing for the country to go through. As you know, we lived through that.
That's right.
And twice we lived through that in the 1980s under Chambers and Robinson.
I want us to discuss that, second time around, because there's a lot of talk about that as far as, the dollar and the strength of it as it goes up. But I know you've got another interview. I've got another one as well. But I want to thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Yes, indeed.